Hola, hola a todos, todas, todes. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Celina Pagan. I'm the Executive Director of the Young Latino Network and a proud Power for Puerto Rico Coalition member. And on behalf of Power for Puerto Rico, the Young Latino Network, and La Tejedora, I want to welcome you to this important conversation. Power for Puerto Rico is a national coalition dedicated to building the power of the diaspora to advocate for Puerto Ricans and our communities. Today's gathering is a rapid response to provide the space to process the elections from a Boricua lens and reflect on what it means for our shared future. Before we dive in, I want to take a moment to acknowledge how many of us might be feeling tonight. The uncertainty, anxiety, and even fear about voting trends and the impact on Puerto Rico and on marginalized communities everywhere are valid. These emotions reflect our deep care and concern for our gente and our shared struggles. But alongside these feelings, we also carry a responsibility to educate ourselves, engage in meaningful and constructive conversations, and deepen our understanding of our complex history and our continued resiliency as a people. This space is for all of us to learn together, challenge ourselves, and grow as a community committed to justice and equity. Para aquellos que desean escuchar en español, por favor visiten el canal de Power for Puerto Rico Coalition en YouTube y ajusten las configuraciones de idioma. We also invite you to actively participate by dropping your comments and questions and throughout the discussion. We're here to process, listen, and learn together, and your voice is essential in shaping this conversation. It's now my honor to introduce tonight's moderator, Natasha del Toro. Natasha is an award-winning television correspondent, podcast host, and producer with over 20 years of experience in journalism and broadcast media. You may recognize her work on PBS, Al Jazeera English, and Scripps, where she covers critical issues such as inequality, criminal justice, immigration, voting rights, and sexual assault. Natasha has also reported extensively in Latin America and the Caribbean. She is the creator of the American Realities, a book and multimedia website developed alongside photographer Joachim Akilton, which explores poverty and inequality in the U.S. Natasha is a bilingual and deeply proud of her Puerto Rican roots and making her the perfect voice for tonight's discussion. So, Natasha, welcome. Thank you.
Celina, thank you so much for that introduction. 20 years sounds like a long time to be doing this work. But I'm so honored to be here. Thank you all for inviting me to join you in this important and timely conversation. For those of you who are maybe a little less familiar with me, I'm based in Tampa, Florida, which is a city with a very big Puerto Rican population along the I-4 corridor. Florida used to be a battleground state. Unfortunately, it is not anymore. I have done a lot of reporting on Puerto Rico through the years. Every chance I get to report on my community, whether it's on cultural issues or political issues. I was in Puerto Rico in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria. And in this last year, I did a deep dive on Act 22, a policy I think we all know about on the island that has turned Puerto Rico into a tax haven for the wealthy, including a lot of crypto people that have moved there, contributing to gentrification and inequality. As you said, I'm Puerto Rican and I care deeply about Puerto Rico. I care about our communities on the island and in the diaspora. And I know all of our guests on the panel tonight do as well. They're all leaders, and this is a central part of their life's work. So it's a big honor to be here and to talk about the elections in the US and Puerto Rico and about what's next. Without further ado, I want our panelists to all introduce themselves and their incredible work that they do. So let's start with Cari Claudio Betancourt. If you could introduce yourself.
Saludos a todos. Mi nombre es Karina Claudio Betancourt, o Cari. My name is Cari Claudio Betancourt, and I direct La Tejedora, which is a youth organization that works in Puerto Rico to advance self-determination and climate justice for our people. It's a pleasure to be here today. Placer.
Cari, welcome. It's great to have you here. And our next panelist, if you could introduce yourself, is Raúl Echevarría.
Peace, everybody. Gracias por la palabra. My name is Raúl Echevarría, born and raised in Humboldt Park, Chicago, the bed of the Puerto Rican community in Chicago, Illinois. Also worked at the Centro Cultural Puertorriqueño Juan Antonio Correa Head under the tutelage of Professor Jose Lopez. That's a badge of honor for me. Relocated to Southeast Michigan about 11 years ago, where I work in Southwest Detroit, major part of the city of Detroit that is Latino Hispanic, where I serve as the director of community organizing and advocacy at Detroit Hispanic Development Corporation. I also teach a social justice class at the University of Detroit Mercy, and I am in completing year 2 of a 3-year doctorate program in ministry, studying liberation theology. So it is a pleasure, and I look forward to the conversation.
Cool. Welcome. Our next panelist, Jerry Maldonado.
Buenas noches, familia. Gracias, Natasha. It is so great to be with y'all. Jerry Maldonado, he, him pronouns. I'm calling from the great state of New York by way of the greater island of Puerto Rico. I'm New Rican by birth. I am the vice president of program at PolicyLink. PolicyLink is a national advocacy equity organization. We support research, advocacy, coalition building that's focused on advancing a multiracial democracy and building an economy that works for all of us and creating thriving communities of opportunity, focused on housing, infrastructure, climate, water. And we do deep place-based work, including a new initiative that we launched in Puerto Rico about 2 years ago, really committed to advancing equitable development on the island. It is great to be with y'all.
Awesome. Thank you, Jerry. And finally, our panelist, Maria Quiñones Sanchez.
Hola, hola. So excited to be here among such great Boricuas as we figure out what we do next. My name is Maria Quiñones Sanchez. I was the first Puerto Rican Latina elected to city council in the city of Philadelphia. I served 15 years. I recently resigned to run for mayor unsuccessfully, and now I continue my work in advocacy, doing some government relations and project management, having worked for the government of Puerto Rico and now part-time living in Puerto Rico. I look forward to this conversation and recommit myself to this work.
Yes, Maria, I can hear the cookies in the background. It's always the giveaway when somebody's in Puerto Rico. Well, I'm so excited to have all of you here. You're all leaders in your communities, and I know that we have a lot to talk about tonight. So let's dive into this conversation. Maria, I'd like to start with you, actually. There's been a lot said about the way that Latinos and Boricuas voted in this election. Some of it has even been kind of blaming Latinos for a Trump victory, which is actually not true. We did see a shift towards Trump. There was about a 13% jump in the Latino vote since 2016. There's also different data between the exit polls to now precinct-based and other information. But still, it's clear that there definitely does seem to be a trend towards the GOP. We know Pennsylvania was the swing state with the largest Puerto Rican population. So maybe you could help us understand and cut through the noise. What happened and what didn't happen?
So it's real important, as we all reflect, right, this post-mortem, we probably lost this election 4 years ago when Biden won, right? We elected probably the oldest president with a young Gen X VP who was supposed to be prepared, right, to be the next generation of leadership. The Democratic Party, National Party avant-gardes changed their minds, right? They changed their minds and they didn't talk to us about when they were changing the strategy, right? So we have a highly qualified candidate who has 100 plus days to pull together what the party didn't do over the last 4 years, right? So this finger pointing, there's enough, is like death by 1,000 strikes. In Pennsylvania, which has been historically a purple state, and we understand that Democratic majorities do not happen without it going through a barrio. We know it on the ground. The National Party for the last 4 years did not invest in the state parties. And in turn, the state parties have not invested in us in terms of a full engagement in a conversation, right? Pennsylvania is where the immigration debate started in Hazleton with lawsuits. Pennsylvania is where we have the most number of registered hate groups, right? So we are like hostile ground zero territory. And while Latinos continue to grow in this state, we have to fight for our seats at the table. I got elected 4 times without Democratic support in the city of Philadelphia. You know, when they tell you once you get elected, you're part of the system. Well, guess what? This Puerto Rican Latina never got party support because my party was my community, right? And so we have to acknowledge that coming to us at the last minute, as we saw, you know, this campaign try to formalize an agenda, a Boricua agenda 2 weeks before, right? Unlashing it. If it wasn't for Power for Puerto Rico, Unidos US, and others who were trying to engage our community, because at the end of the day, it was economic stupid, right? It was. Why are Puerto Ricans in Pennsylvania in those hostile territories that I just described? Because of economic reasons. And while we have a very popular governor who got vetted for this process, 2 years ago, the party was notified we lost every statewide Democratic seat. So the writing was on the wall, right? Once you see that and you don't readjust and say, hey, wait a minute, we have a problem here, we see trends. And the Trump campaign was quiet, it was surgical. They didn't have to get people to vote for them. They had to get angry, lazy voters to come out, and they were surgical around the percentage of people they had to go to, and they targeted our men, right, who are underemployed, struggling with the messaging that they did. And so they only had to convince and double their numbers in some of those areas. They set ground games in cities like Reading in the 2-2 corridor, where we have now tens of thousands of Puerto Ricans and Latinos who have established a home there. They surgically went into our evangelical churches and had conversations that our party did not, right? So in the end, we had to pull it all together despite, right? As I used to say, I'm a member of this Democratic Party. I'm gonna make you better despite yourself. But you had all of the trimmings for the perfect storm, and you were either going to win or you were not. And we saw that. I now live right outside the city. 2 weeks before the election, I went early voting, and I saw all these white women at the polling place, and I felt good. And I said, whoa, espérate, vamos a ganar. They were not voting for us.
That's what we were all thinking, right? We were thinking these women are coming out to vote. They're going to vote different than their husbands. They're going to vote for abortion rights, et cetera. But everything you're saying, Maria, actually reminds me of a quote that I read that I wanted to bring out. This was by Carlos Odio, who was a director at Equus Research. And he said, a deep reckoning is needed among Democrats and other leaders who claim to represent working Latinos, right? He said, what happened in this election does not come to pass without years of neglect that finally came to a head. So the Democratic Party, based on what you're saying, has just been taking the Latino vote for granted and not doing the work.
Absolutely. And what they have to come to a term where they either become a big umbrella and accept the growing diversity. We knew what states were going to be at stake. We knew the role that Latinos played in those states. We saw the writing on the wall 2 years ago with the trend towards the Republican Party statewide, and yet locally, nothing was being done in the ground game. Again, Latinos had to step up for themselves through Power for Puerto Rico, through Unidos US, but with very limited resources, where the Trump folks, the MAGA folks, they had endless money. And between the book banning, they were organizing, and it's much easier, we all know, to organize in crisis and hate than it is to organize people around what they want, right? It's just easier work to do, and they were very, very surgical. Our evangelical churches became a ground game for them, and they went in there and they listened and they got that support.
And I understood they went to barber shops and all this. And, it was very, I think, surprising and for all of us too, even after the obscene racist jokes that were being made at that Trump rally by the comedian about Puerto Rico, being a floating island of garbage. I thought, oh, we all hoped that would somehow move the needle, and we're surprised when it didn't. But I think it speaks to everything that you're saying, that the Democrats just hadn't put in the work. So now I want to move to Cari, and who is actually coming to us from Puerto Rico. Cari, can you share with the audience why this election cycle was so historic and different from previous ones in Puerto Rico? And what are the implications of the electoral and ballot outcomes for the island?
Definitely. And I just have to say that my electricity has been flaking thanks to Luma, who we all hate.
Nothing's changed.
Right, if you lose me, that's what happened. So yes, I am Cari. I direct an organization based here in San Juan, Puerto Rico called La Tejedora. And we were part of a coalition called Prende Tu Voto, which was a coalition that was led by 10 youth organizations. Where we registered a historic amount of young people to vote. Not without challenges, of course, because in Puerto Rico you have to have a card, a voter card, to be able to vote, and the commissions, the elections commissions, made it very difficult for people to take out these cards. Nonetheless, over 150,000 new registrations and activations happened this election cycle, and 80% of those were young people between 18 and 25 years old. So young people, I think one of the unprecedented things is that young people got really involved in these elections. Not only did they register, but they also participated in really high rates. We don't have the numbers yet, but we saw the long lines, and we saw a lot of young people participating, and they also got really involved in the process of being poll workers, which was really exciting to see all of this energy coming through in this cycle. And I think that the results are still being scrutinized. There's a process in Puerto Rico called el escrutinio, which is sort of like a recount of all of the votes to make sure that everything lines up correctly. But so far, this is the first time in our history where a pro-independence governor candidate wins second place. Right now, he's at 32% of the votes, which is very different from other election cycles. In terms of the other races, we have there is about 3 people from this alliance that was also a historical thing. It was like a left alliance between the Independence Party and the Movimiento Victoria Ciudadana, which are 2 parties that are on the left, which got together and ran sort of candidacies together. And so, so in terms of that was very historic, and they got so far 4 representatives into the legislation, and then and then 1 senator that got into the Senate race. And so that's really interesting. We may see more of candidates for this alliance come into the legislature, because there is this rule in Puerto Rico that if the governing party gets a big majority of the seats, then they need to give more seats to the second party that got the most votes in the gubernatorial race, which is the Independence Party. So in which case we can end up with about 6 to 7 representatives in the legislature from the left coalition. Of course, from La Tejedora, we're a nonprofit organization, so we didn't support any of these parties. But, putting on my personal hat, I am a pro-independence supporter. I believe that Puerto Rico should be free. And for me, it was very historic to also see the support for independence in a sham plebiscite that is a non-binding plebiscite, right? Where the independents got 30+% of the votes. But if you combine the blank ballots and the free sovereignty ballots with the independence ballot, statehood lost in Puerto Rico. It got 46% versus 51% for the non-statehood and also the blank ballots that were protested. So all of those nuances, all of those exciting things, I think despite, the statehood party sort of winning the governorship and most of the legislature, we're going to continue to see a trend towards change in Puerto Rico, and that's really exciting. And I think that was a lot of it was led by younger generations that are tired of living in the conditions that we have lived for so many years in Puerto Rico. And so, those are some of the nuances. I'm happy to answer any questions, but yes.
And to your point, I mean, it's really exciting that so many young people that got involved, and that this is really a referendum on, people don't want the same old two parties anymore. They don't want the status quo. They are tired of chronic power outages and a lack of affordable housing, and they're fed up with the corruption. So, what is the mood now in Puerto Rico? I mean, I know that, like you said, that Jennifer Gonzalez from the PNP or the statehood party did win, but as you say, it's unprecedented that the independence candidate did so well, and that so many people were really fighting for that. So what is the mood in Puerto Rico now?
I think that we are still sort of in a little bit of a limbo in terms of waiting for the results of the escrutinio, which is this recount that I'm talking about. So waiting to see, but I think people are excited and energized to continue to organize regardless of the elections. We know the elections is one of the many tools that we can use to create change. And so at least from our part, from La Tejedora, we will continue to organize around issues of energy, human rights, the protection of our natural resources, of our beaches. And I don't think that will ever stop regardless of the election results. And I think one of the lessons that we've learned is that Puerto Rico can be an example also for the United States and other countries on how to build a left coalition that is strong. I think there's some critiques about, how the coalition was led, but a lot of it had to do with, the nuances of our electoral law, which, favor the two governing parties, as you've suggested. And so I think that there is a lot to learn, though, from the coalition that was formed and the ways in which people can vote differently and can form these coalitions in the future in the United States or elsewhere.
Thank you so much for saying that. I couldn't agree more. I was in Puerto Rico reporting, and I was feeling the energy on the ground and the grassroots, organizing that was happening. And I was like, this is how it's done. And this is what people in the United States, on the mainland, they could learn a lot from that. So I absolutely couldn't agree more with you, Kari. So thank you. And I want to take
one last thing I would say about this is that I think that Puerto Rico has led on what innovative and amazing and powerful organizing looks like when we kicked out the most powerful navy in the world out of Vieques, when we organized to kick out a corrupt governor in Puerto Rico, and now where we formed this left powerful coalition that didn't lead to victory, but I think is going to get us there eventually.
Thank you. That is so great. So that fire, that spark has been lit, and it's not going to die out. Yeah, there's a lot to learn. There's a lot to learn there, and you guys are doing some great work on the ground. I think we're going to take a minute now to ask a question from people who are tuning in right now. So the question from one of our viewers is, under Project 2025, what is an issue that may affect the island worse than the states?
And that question's for me?
For you. Yeah,
Okay.
for you.
Well, I think that, personally, as a trans person, I am, terrified about what that means for trans people in Puerto Rico and what Project 2025 means for my community and for myself as a trans person. I think that a lot of the other things that the plan lays out is eliminating the Department of Education, which will greatly affect the majority of our students, which are special needs students. I think it's going to affect, everything from, Medicare, access to Medicare, Medicaid, access to, SNAP and other critical assistance that comes from the federal government. But I do have to say that, again, with my personal hat, as a pro-independent, as a person who believes in the independence of Puerto Rico, that we have to take Trump and McConnell serious about when they say that they don't want to admit Puerto Rico as a state, and we need to start acting to work to achieve the independence that we deserve as a nation, and as international law recognizes it's our right to establish our independence. And so I think out of all of this, the silver lining for me is that, okay, let's hear them loud and clear, and let's actually establish ourselves in the international arena as an independent nation that, is detached from all of these terrible things, and for Puerto Ricans to be able to come back to Puerto Rico and to build a dignified nation that we deserve.
Jerry also wants to jump into the question about the potential impact of Project 2025 on the island.
Thank
Jerry?
you, Patty and Natasha. I think if past behavior is prolonged, what we can expect under Trump 2.0 and Project 2025 is an all-out assault on the public sector, and particularly on public spending. And so what we know is basically right now, only about 41% of all recovery dollars in Puerto Rico have been obligated, right? And so there is a real threat that a significant amount of those resources could actually be clawed back. So there is an intentional effort by Project 2025 to continue to hollow out government, to continue to reduce spending. So we can expect that there may be an effort to claw back those dollars and all other kind of broader reconstruction dollars. And you can forget about our access to Medicaid parity, to SSI. Like there's going to be a full out assault in those areas. The other major threat under Project 2025 is really that there is a threat that the control board actually will be more emboldened under Trump 2.0. And that is a real threat, because that is the vehicle by which an austerity policy has been advanced on the island that has systematically extracted wealth. So you have the possibility of both being deprived and clawed back of these federal infrastructure and disaster recovery resources, while you have a control board that will be more empowered to extract resources, and you have a deepening economic crisis on the island.
Thank you so much. That's scary. That's actually pretty scary. It's colonialism on steroids is really what we're looking at. Okay, so now that was a great question. Whoever wrote that in from the audience, I really appreciate that. And Jerry, we're going to stay with you for this next question. Now, I know, for the Puerto Rican diaspora and for Puerto Rico, all kinds of policy changes were being advocated for. What are your, maybe you could talk about some of those, but also what are your biggest concerns now?
So I'll try to be optimistic, given that I was giving a very kind of negative. I think one of the things, like in this particular moment, that's really important for us as members of the diaspora, in alignment with our movement partners on the island, is to really recognize that we are worth fighting for, actually, right? Like our generation is now at the crossroads, right, of one of those moments in our history that will have a fundamental impact on the trajectory of both this country and the island. And so while we actually need to take a moment to grieve, to mourn, to reflect, and to care for ourselves and each other, we have to be ready and activated to really think through kind of what are the longer movement building, coalition building strategies that we'll need to like not just play defense, right, but actually define and move an offensive policy agenda on the island and on the mainland. And I'll just remind us all that we are a people and a community that are born in struggle. I am the offspring of Operation Bootstrap. The island survived the longest blackout in U.S. history. I often tell people Spanglish is my language of resistance and it's my language of affirmation. And so I think that what we need to do is a couple of things. And I think picking up on the two last presenters, the first thing is really to reflect on what we're seeing happening in Puerto Rico, because I think what we're seeing happening in Puerto Rico actually gives us clues to the pathway forward here in this country as we think about forging those new policy solutions. And there was a refrán that was used during the protests on the island, right? Leading into this election. All the affirmation was, somos más y no tenemos miedo, right? We are the majority and we are not afraid. It is really important for the diaspora to remember that actually this election did not give Trump a mandate. He's assuming a false mandate when the numbers actually do not bear them out, right? If you actually look at the numbers, his increase was a small percentage, right, over his last win in 2020. The reality was that actually fewer Democrats turned out, that unfortunately the Democratic Party actually lost their working class base, not just across Latinos, but across all demographics, including the youth. So the first thing that we have to remember as we're thinking about our agenda is that we cannot retrench into a defensive posture, right? This cannot just be about preventing the worst things from happening, some of those bad things I already mentioned, but actually defining the affirmative future that we want for ourselves. And I think here we have an important lesson from what Gotti said, what just finished happening on the island, right? Dalmao's historic victory really was a victory forged out of a movement, right? A movement that was led by the PIB and the Alliance that actually challenged bipartisan control. Think about the parallels to the US. It wasn't about a campaign. It was a movement with a vision, and a vision actually founded on a people's agenda with very clear platforms, right? The platforms are around economic justice, right? And structural reform to the island's democracy, including elimination of the control board, campaign finance. It was an agenda around reforming key parts of the country's economy, our housing system, our power system, our education system, our healthcare system. And it was a commitment to decolonization, right? Mm-hmm. If you look at that, that is a comprehensive people's agenda that aligned with a people's movement. And I say that because it's really important on the US side for us to compare. Trump was leading a movement. Harris was running a campaign. Two radically different things. And our way out of this mess actually is to reorient ourselves around a vision and a North Star tied to governing. We have to reclaim the mantle of governing and government with a clear agenda that is structural, that is about structural reform to our democracy, structural reform to our economy, and structural reform to how we invest in the communities that we love, right? How we do that at this moment, a lot of it is going to be playing defense, right? At the national level. The offensive plays will have to continue at the local and state level, because there we have an opportunity to continue to build and to test kind of new models. It's particularly important also in this moment that the diaspora actually align itself very intentionally with these emerging progressive movement, this powerful movement on the island. Together, an aligned diaspora working with, in tandem to, this movement on the island actually has an opportunity to create a political movement, a transnational political movement that has existed in the past that actually gets to some of the drivers of inequality in our country, right? That is both like the challenge of this moment, but it's also the opportunity for us as a diaspora to be in alignment, to be razor focused on those structural reforms, many of which were articulated in this last electoral cycle. We need to think outside of electoral cycles and invest in our communities for a long-term movement that's beyond the 4 years.
That's great, and I'm so glad that you said that this was not a mandate. You keep hearing that coming out of Trump's mouth and out of his supporters, and in the media, that this was a mandate. It really wasn't a mandate. There were other issues at play here, and like you said, the Democrats have not been coming up with. They're not. It's a campaign instead of a movement, and they're not delivering for working class people. So there is a lot to learn from what happened on the island, and people on the island they're that fed up too. Maybe that's what it takes, is for people to get that fed up. But it does help give a silver lining to a lot of the bleakness that we have been feeling post-election, because whatever Trump is saying, it doesn't. One thing may come out of his mouth, but it's not actually going to improve the lives of working class people. So it's important to keep that in mind as we move forward and come up with new ideas to actually help working class people's lives and all of our lives. So we have another question from the audience right now. That question is, this is good. Who is responsible for getting Trump elected? Latinos or white women? I don't know who wants to take that question. Maybe Maria.
Well, I told my personal story. I went out there, the suburbs of Philadelphia. After the last election, when Trump got elected, and many of us went to these rallies with the pussy hats, and you saw that in Philadelphia and all over the country. I spent a long time having conversations with my white women allies around when were they going to be allies to Black women in particular who have carried this party. Because if they're not respecting Black women, they're not going to respect Latina women. And what we've seen particularly in this election, and what we saw in Pennsylvania, was this incredible focus to white women in the suburbs, right? And no attention to Latina women and even the Black women who were self-motivated, right? Just because they were self-motivated and they were doing their work, it didn't mean that they didn't need the resources and all those other things. But, we had Liz Cheney, they sent Michelle Obama to the suburbs. And again, I'm thinking, okay, they're going to be there, right? They are going to show up. And 2 weeks prior to the election, I went to vote and there was a line. And I said, oh, these white women are coming out to vote. And what we saw, and I don't know how many times they have to show us that they will vote their economic interests and they will vote their privilege, because they're not going to struggle with healthcare access. They're not, they are not going to suffer all of the things that Black and brown women have to suffer. But at the same time, when you look at the margins, again, who surgically the Trump people went after, just today I was talking to a Latina businesswoman here in Puerto Rico, who's not a native of Puerto Rico. And she says to me, well, he's going to bring law and order and he's a businessman. And I said, did you get $1 million when you started your business? Did you have 6, bankruptcies? And this notion, for me, it was sort of lost. Latina women in particular, because we only represent 1% of the elected officials, right? I never thought I would be part of the 1% club, and I was. When I got elected, I was told that you're part of the 1%. Latina women have to be engaged. There was an article that Erica circulated around today, and I encourage people to read it, because we talk economics, stupid, right? We take care of our seniors, we take care of our young people, all of those things. And as the again, the party in its failure to put an agenda, they had a candidate 4 years ago, didn't set her up, didn't prepare her, but didn't prepare the message. Latina women, we carry a message that is family, that is comprehensive. We can be super voters if we choose. When I want to campaign with La Comadres, right? I went out there and I said, if we learned anything, was between the operatives pushing media and the digital war, we have lost our ability to knock on doors and just listen. Just listen to people. And the economics of, el pan de cada día were there. The messaging, the statistical data was there. And for whatever reason, the campaign in Pennsylvania in particular sent all these resources and all this energy, Oprah, Michelle Obama, Liz Cheney, to suburban white women.
To the suburbs. Yep.
Y nosotras.
Mm-hmm. They didn't even bother coming to Florida. So the Democrats didn't even bother coming to Florida. That's a really good point. Thank you, Maria. I want to move now. I want to move to Raul Echevarria, who has been waiting so patiently. Raul, there are some posts that are circulating now about how people should take steps for their safety and take care of each other. You know, in Puerto Rico, we've seen rapid response networks like community kitchens become something that's standard. How do we knit these things together and in connection with other communities?
Thank you, Natasha, and thank you to all the compadres, comadres, for their time and for their effort in trying to help illuminate what this all means for our community, both in the diaspora and on the island. I wanted to start by saying, sort of setting a context. Don Oscar Lopez Rivera said, "La lucha es vida toda." He said, "Doy gracias a la vida. Le doy gracias por haberme enseñado que ella es lucha toda, que si pretendo vivir, tengo que luchar y luchar si pretendo de vivir." For me, the answer to the question involves like this notion of like, we're going to do what we've been doing. We're going to do as a colonized people what we've been doing since day one, which is struggling to decolonize, struggling to liberate ourselves, struggling to liberate one another, both in the diaspora and in Puerto Rico. The work, el trabajo is the same, right? And I know there's nuance and particularities and analysis, but I wanted to sort of talk about first and foremost that for me in the work that I do in the diaspora, like it's like, okay, let's get to work, right? When right before Hurricanes Irma and Maria hit the archipelago, Detroit had gone under the largest municipal bankruptcy in the U.S. history. And all of the vulture capitalists were looking at what was happening in Detroit because they had eyes on Puerto Rico. And sure enough, from what they learned in Detroit's bankruptcy, they started to impose with La Junta Fiscal. And Detroit received a delegation from Puerto Rico during an annual conference here because they wanted to know, like, what did Detroiters do to resist? What can Puerto Ricans on the island learn from that experience, and what can they apply? What didn't work? And so there began to talk about solidarity and building bridges, right? Because we understand that this late stage capitalism is affecting all of us, including its current colonial holdings, but also its internalized colonies like Detroit. And so beginning to think about solidarity and bridge building, yo me puse a pensar. I said, what can I learn from my people on the island as someone from the diaspora? And I looked at how people were organized, activists, artists were organized against La Junta Fiscal and lo jodido cenizas that they were dumping all over. And then the hurricanes hit. And those same people that I saw protesting se activaron and they started mutual aid work. And I said, damn, what can I learn from this? I said, we probably need to start doing these things all around wherever the US has its hold or control. We probably have to start building mutual aid networks because what the moment is teaching me is that the systems that we counted on to serve the people have failed us and will continue to fail us. And so what can we do to be proactive, to take care of ourselves, regardless of what the systems are prepared to do? So I began to talk about with people in Detroit about creating mutual aid networks. And then I looked at Casa Pueblo, and Casa Pueblo was a beacon of hope. In the middle of all the darkness, there was light. And obviously that preaches for itself. But I said, we need those kinds of hubs to sobrevivir lo que, whatever is next. In Detroit, whenever the wind blows, the power goes out. And obviously, Puerto Ricans know what that is. That's Luma all day, right? And so I began to sort of find these intersections and these moments, these sort of points of solidarity. And I began to talk about, like, well, what can we do to build hubs here? What do we need to be ready? And so for me, that's still the work. The work is still the same. We just, there's nuance and there's shifts and changes, but we have to continue the path of what I call the path of liberation. The last thing I just want to highlight that I learned from the work in my work in Humboldt Park, Chicago, Illinois, is learning about cimarronaje, right? What can we learn from the escaped black bodies who went into the mountains and the wilderness and learned from the indigenous people to create alternativas, right? To create alternative communities. And sometimes they went down in the plantation and they collaborated with the plantation owners on their own terms. And then sometimes they knew, like, oh shit, I better disconnect myself from this and then go back into the wilderness and back into the mountains. So sometimes we engage and sometimes we disengage, right? But we do this work on our terms, and that's what I think about here in the diaspora, here in Detroit, where the politics is also super messy. That sometimes we have faith in the system and we give time to it, and then sometimes we just got to do our own stuff, and take care of our own selves. And this notion of, like, mutual aid or community kitchens comes in, where if we don't have each other's back, then we can just throw in the towel. But obviously, Puerto Rico has never thrown in the towel. Puerto Rico has, as small as the archipelago it is still no se ha rendido. Todavía no se ha, it hasn't given in to the power of colonialism. And so for me, that's sufficient hope to keep the fight, to keep the struggle. The last thing I'll say to close is that what we need to do beyond just Puerto Ricans and beyond just diaspora or Puerto Ricanos in La Isla is to weave or intersect. I talk about basket weaving a lot, which is sort of an indigenous tradition. Or community organizers need to learn how to weave baskets. They need to know that it's not just your work. It's the Black struggle. It's the Arab Muslim struggle. We need to weave those baskets. Or, if you want another motif, webs of relationship. We need to be like the spiders, intersecting these little nodes that we have and creating webs of relationships across boundaries in solidarity with one another. If we're going to survive the onslaught that many people believe it lies ahead of us, then community organizing, specifically community organizers, need to see their role as intersecting and building those bridges of solidarity.
Thank you. That was a really inspiring response. And mutual aid societies, I mean, I think, I live in Tampa, in a place that Ybor City was built on mutual aid societies, and that's how they thrived. And in Puerto Rico is a collectivist society. It's not an individualistic society. And that's how people come together after hurricanes and after La Junta and after all of the economic oppression that Puerto Ricans have faced. And they are able to get back up every time. Why? Because they come together. So thank you so much for that comment. I think there's a lot to learn for us here in the United States and the mainland as well. We have one more question to take from our audience. I want to thank them for such more questions. Here we go. How can we stop HR 9495, which threatens nonprofits by allowing tax-exempt status to be revoked without evidence? Who wants to jump in and answer that question? Does any of our panelists have thoughts? How can we stop HR 9495, which threatens nonprofits by allowing tax-exempt status to be revoked without evidence? Does anybody have thoughts? Okay, let me try a different one. Congress may move to pass a bill that would give Trump power to stifle nonprofits. What can we do? How can people fight back against that? Any thoughts? Maria.
I
and
think
Patty.
that's the beginning of what is tonight's kind of call to action, right? Cuando we finish our coño, carajo, la sanse, then we're like, okay, how do we reorganize ourselves, right? And these bills are just going to keep coming. They're going to come at the federal level, they're going to come at the state level, they're going to come at local levels where they have majorities. They're going to tackle, and this is the 501c3 status has been tested for a very long time around advocacy and lobbying. So this is like this, we know the playbook, right? And so how do we utilize these opportunities to organize around what is going to be an all-out assault? I'm in Philadelphia. They've already started looking at the 250th anniversary of Philadelphia and taking it away from Philadelphia, right? And, the Liberty Bell's there on Fifth and Market. And they literally have said, some of the Republicans, and this is conversations that I've had with friends, is sort of like, how do we make Philadelphia a showcase by coming after them very early on to scare others? So for us, that's the call to action around how do we organize, right? Again, Hazleton, Pennsylvania started the immigration debate. We have been the hate group start. How do we begin to use this intersection? And I agree with Karina and all the, Puerto Rico, renuncia Ricky. Everything that we've seen is the resilience of Puerto Rican people who, once we believe and we're passionate about something, anything is possible. So how do we harness that in our communities while we brace for what he told us was coming?
If I can build on what Maria just said, elections have consequences, right? And we've just had folks elected. It is really important, number one, for us to hold accountable the folks, including Dems and swing districts, right? Who may not have the courage sometimes to vote the way we want them to vote. They need to have the courage. And I also think that there are some moderate Republicans who would see this as a potential threat. So one is like organizing and making sure our voices are heard. Two, this may require a legal challenge as well, right? Like, because this actually opens up a whole set of potential implications that a legal strategy, I think, would actually need to be kind of developed around. I think this is an existential threat to our sector, right? And I think beyond this vote, I think it goes back to Maria's point. We ultimately need to kind of organize long-term to be able to kind of head these things off, right? And be kind of a thorn on the side throughout the next 4 years. So we have to play defense and offense over the next 4 years.
I want to add to what's been said is join Power for Puerto Rico coalition, like be a member, like donate to causes like Akari's cause. Like if you have the disposable income, put it to work and let it be your voice, but also like get active, right, in these national efforts. I know like the first thing that I would do, and I don't think I have to do that, but I'll call my favorite congressperson in Michigan, which is Rashida Tlaib, and like I can imagine that we probably need to like desarrollar una campaña, right? And I think that part of that is having national coalitions that can carry that heavy lift of a national campaign to pressure Congress, or like Jerry said, to follow the legal route, right? And that costs money, and so all of that.
Totally. Gotti, I didn't know if you wanted to jump in and final thoughts.
Sure. Thank you again, everyone, for the opportunity. And I think that for us here in Puerto Rico, like I said, we will continue to organize and fight against the PNP government, which is going to undoubtedly accelerate the climate crisis in Puerto Rico. It's going to accelerate permits for buildings on the beach. It's going to destroy reserves. It's going to be a very tough time also on the human rights front. I think combined with a Trump administration, for those of you who don't know, the PNP governor who won is a pro-Trump person. She's very conservative. So in terms of the fight that we have ahead, it's a heavy one. So if you have people that live in Puerto Rico, ask them to join and organize with us and other organizations on the ground. Somebody said support Centro de Periodismo Investigativo. That's a great organization. Support La Tejedora, my organization. If you have family also in Puerto Rico, I would encourage you to ask them to support the vote count that's happening right now with La Alianza, because they need volunteers every day. The PNP and the PPD, they have people that are paid government employees that are doing this work, but the Alianza doesn't have that infrastructure. So please help this process so we can, see democracy through here. And finally, again, a call to sort of continue to fight for the self-determination of Puerto Rico and the independence of Puerto Rico. Given the state that we are in right now, and given the reality, I think stateholders need to really come to terms with the fact that Puerto Rico will not be a state, not at least under Republican rule. And so let's be creative. Let's open up the doors towards thinking about our future as a sovereign nation. Thank you very much.
Cuddy, thank you so much. Now, I want to give everybody else an opportunity to go around and give us sort of your call to action. I mean, it's important. We often talk about a lot of the problems that we face, but let's talk about like what actions that we can take. So maybe Raul, can we start with you?
Sure, thank you, Natasha. Y ahora que, right? That's the title of today's rapid talk, and that's the salient question that we should take home with ourselves tonight. Whoever's been viewing and listening in, y ahora que? What are we prepared to do? Because being idle is not acceptable. These are the moments that try us the most, and Puerto Rico has responded time and time and time again. Has been talked about, and so para mí, the answer to y ahora que is to get involved with Power for Puerto Rico, to get involved with the actual direct action that's happening in Puerto Rico with groups like Acaris, and it, if you live in a state with a positive elected official like Rashida, who I know supports the cause for decolonization of Puerto Rico. She supports the cause for decolonization of Gaza and Palestine. Dale respalde, give them words of encouragement, because this struggle is going to be long, and we need to make sure that we can make it through to the end.
Maria?
Yeah, like I said, let's celebrate with our families this wonderful holiday season Puerto Ricanos always have, and use the Sanse as an opportunity to say, okay, now we reset, we refocus, we recommit, and figure out ways locally with our legislation, with our legislators. There's a lot of congressional districts where we have folks who need us to help them have the courage, to Jerry's point, because they don't have the courage. We need to build that courage about them standing up. The biggest concerns around 2025 is, the unspent funds here. I've been doing some work and just looking at that. So we have to play, as you said, defense and offense, but then just like recenter in that the Puerto Rican diaspora and the Puerto Rican experience is so very unique, right? And we can learn from each other. We need to support each other. I think this election and the movimiento taught us that we are one. La diáspora y Puerto Rico somos uno, ¿verdad? When we connect that way, we can move this forward. So I believe in my people. I believe in the young people. When I hear young people who were enthused about this election, I feel extremely hopeful as a mother of a millennial and a Gen Z. I want them to be, my Gen Z who grew up with Obama as president, I want my granddaughter, Marimal, to know that a woman will be president in the United States, and we can do this.
And Jerry?
So as my friend said, power comes from the ground up, not from the top down, right? And so we talked about really that we're more powerful together. I'm a recovering Catholic, so I say 3 calls to action. The first is go on weareworthfightingfor.org. It is a broad national coalition that are organizing house parties across the country, right? These are like campaigns to like unify us around a kind of a shared agenda and a shared strategy. That's where it all begins. So start there. Second, invest in our movement partners on the island. Kari has suggested they are powerful. They are leading the way. We need actually to throw down resources and lift up their voices. And third, for members of the diaspora, it is urgent for us to be aligned around a shared agenda that goes at the heart of these austerity, anti-democratic policies that are in Puerto Rico now flourishing, but have come back home to roost, right? So things that are piloted in other countries always come back. And so it is really important for us to leverage the relationships, the networks, Power for Puerto Rico, organizations like Policy Link who are working to align themselves and activate. The diaspora has power. We need to activate it and move it towards a shared agenda. That's the future.
I wish we had pots and pans now to bang on. One thing, we have a lot ahead, a lot to work. Our work is cut out for us, but one thing Puerto Ricans know how to, at least we know how to make it fun. I feel a little bit better tonight. I mean, this is a tough time, and I think a lot of us were pretty shocked these last few weeks, but I feel better after hearing from all of you. Thank you all for coming tonight and sharing all of your knowledge and giving us something to work towards. So thank you guys again, and thank you all for inviting me to join you. We need to keep these conversations going. It's really the only way forward. Selena, back to you. Selena, I think we might need to try that again because you're on mute.
Ha! Thank you.
That was your practice round.
Thank you. Good call. Thank you. Okay, let's get this one more time. Now that I'm unmuted, thank you so much, everyone. As we close, I want to extend my deepest gratitude to Natasha del Toro for moderating tonight's powerful discussion and our incredible panelists for sharing their wisdom and insights. For those of you in or near New York City, we're excited to announce that Power for Puerto Rico will host the first in a series of community conversations this Saturday, November 23rd at 3:30 p.m. at La Marqueta en el Barrio. Spread the word to your friends and family in New York City. We love to see them there. As Boricuas in the diaspora, we have a unique opportunity to grow our power in so many ways. Take the time to do your research, look into local efforts, and understand that we are working both inside and outside of oppressive systems to create change. And there are countless ways to get involved, whether it's by offering your talent, your time, or your treasures. So do me a favor, sign up for action alerts through powerforpuertorico.com. That's power, the number 4, puertorico.com. And family y familia, this work cannot happen without resources, so we deeply appreciate your support. So if you can, please visit the donation link that will be in the comments section and contribute whatever you can. Every single dollar and every single penny counts, and your thoughtfulness fuels this movement. So we need you. We need your voice, your energy, and your commitment. Our community is resilient, but we are the strongest when we come together. Nos tenemos. We have us. So again, thank you all for joining us tonight. Please don't forget to share the live stream link with your networks, and together we can continue to build and fight for a brighter future. Gracias y buenas noches a todos.